The morning sun poured gently over Emily's kitchen, casting golden light on the small vase of daisies she had arranged the night before, and as she sipped her coffee, she watched Mark kiss their daughter Lily goodbye at the front door, smiling with warmth that seemed effortless, yet something in his eyes made her pause, a flicker of distance she couldn't quite place. Emily had always loved these quiet moments, the ordinary rhythm of family life, the soft hum of the dishwasher, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery across the street. But lately, a subtle unease had taken root in her chest, a tiny whisper that whispered, something was off. Mark had been different these past few weeks, staying late at work more often, answering texts with distracted eyes, slipping into long conversations on the phone with a seriousness that didn't seem like business. And although he reassured her with a tired smile, she felt a pang she could not ignore. She remembered how they used to laugh together in the mornings, how he would make silly faces at Lily while pouring cereal, how his hand always found hers without thinking, and now those memories felt like echoes from another life, faint and fragile. That day, as she tidied the kitchen, Emily noticed the glint of his phone across the counter, a text flashing briefly before he could turn it off, and though she didn't read it, the moment left her unsettled, curiosity mixing with a sense of foreboding. She tried to shake it off, telling herself it might be nothing, just work, just friends, but her mind wandered through what-ifs, twisting scenarios that made her stomach tight. Hours passed, and when Mark returned, he seemed distracted, scrolling through his phone, barely engaging in conversation, and Emily felt a quiet ache in her chest, a loneliness that was new and unwelcome. She wanted to confront him, to ask gently why he seemed so far away, but when she tried, he shrugged with tiredness, saying he was just exhausted, that work had been demanding, that everything was fine, and Emily nodded, trying to believe him, trying to feel secure, but her instincts nagged at her, a persistent tug she could not ignore. That night, after Lily was asleep, Emily sat by the window, the moon casting silver light across the garden, and she thought of their life together, of the laughter, the shared dreams, the small moments of tenderness, and yet a shadow had settled over her heart, a sense that the foundation she had trusted might be cracking. She recalled subtle changes. The way Mark's smile sometimes didn't reach his eyes, the way he seemed to glance at his phone with quick, secretive movements, the faint scent of something unfamiliar on his coat, the nervous clearing of his throat when she asked where he had been, all little threads weaving into a fabric of unease. She tried to distract herself with a book, reading lines that made her heart flutter in imagined stories of love and trust, but every sentence brought her mind back to Mark, to questions she feared asking, to scenarios she wasn't ready to face. Her heart pounded when she imagined confronting him, seeing the truth of what she feared, and the thought both terrified and compelled her. Emily wondered how love could endure such quiet suspicion, how a heart could ache from shadows of doubt without proof, and she realized the delicate balance they had always maintained, the trust, the intimacy, the shared dreams, was now at a tipping point. Sleep eluded her, and she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft sounds of the house, feeling the weight of silence, and thinking of the day she might have to face the reality of Mark's choices, the consequences of his distance. She remembered how he had once held her hand after a long day, how his voice could soothe her anxieties, how his laughter could fill the room like sunlight, and now those memories were bittersweet, reminders of what felt lost even as it remained. The fear of betrayal, of a heart divided, gnawed at her, but she also recognized a strange clarity. She could not control Mark, only her own heart, her own responses, and the choices she would make if the shadows became real. As dawn broke the next morning, Emily resolved to watch, to observe, to listen to her instincts, knowing that the path ahead could reveal truths that might hurt beyond measure, yet also offer understanding. A lesson in love, in trust, in resilience. The unease lingered, subtle but insistent, and though Emily longed for comfort, for the warmth of certainty, she understood that life sometimes demanded courage, not in confrontation, but in patient observation. In holding one's own heart steady while the world shifted unpredictably, she took a deep breath, smoothing the counter, watching the street awaken, feeling the gentle breeze through the open window, and though her heart felt heavy, she also felt a strange resolve, a readiness to face whatever was coming, knowing that the choices ahead for both her and Mark would define the future of their love, and that sometimes the hardest lessons were the ones that came quietly through small signs, through subtle changes, through moments that hurt in the watching, but offered the possibility of understanding, of growth, of redemption. And Emily held that thought close, letting it steady her as she prepared to witness, to endure, and to see how love, in its fragile human form, could survive the first tremors of doubt. The following week, Emily felt the weight of unease grow heavier, the air in their home thick with silent questions as Mark came home later each evening, his smiles polite but distant, his laughter forced, and every glance at his phone made her chest tighten with a tension she could no longer ignore. She tried to occupy herself with Lily, gardening, and small tasks around the house, but every sound, every movement, reminded her that something had shifted, that a part of Mark's attention belonged somewhere she couldn't reach, and that gnawed at her heart relentlessly. One afternoon, unable to quell the restless feeling inside, Emily decided to follow her instincts, not to confront, but to quietly observe, and she found herself walking along streets she had never thought to traverse, arriving at a small cafe downtown where Mark had said he was meeting a colleague for a late coffee. She sat in the corner, pretending to read a magazine while her eyes tracked every movement, every laugh, every gesture, and her stomach twisted when she saw him smile at a woman who wasn't her, a woman whose presence seemed intimate, comfortable, and familiar in a way Emily had never felt in recent weeks. And in that moment, the ache in her chest became sharper, a bitter mix of heartbreak, betrayal, and disbelief. She watched silently as they talked, leaning in, sharing quiet jokes, her mind spinning through memories of the early days when Mark had been warm, open, and devoted, when love had been a simple, certain thing, and the contrast was unbearable. Emily wanted to call out, to demand truth, to shatter the moment, but she held herself back, recognizing that the pain of watching, though immense, would teach her more than a confrontation in public ever could, and she felt a strange sense of control in witnessing, as if seeing the truth with her own eyes was the only way to truly grasp the reality of their situation. When Mark finally stood to leave, gathering his things with the casual confidence she had once admired, Emily felt the sting of longing and loss, the quiet sorrow of a woman who realized that the man she loved had allowed his heart to wander. And yet she also noticed his hesitation as he glanced around, a flicker of awareness that perhaps he had been seen, a subtle tension in his posture, a shadow of guilt she hadn't expected. That evening, Emily returned home with Lily, her heart heavy, yet determined to face the truth calmly. And when Mark arrived, she met him with a quiet composure that startled him. She didn't accuse, she didn't yell. She only let her eyes speak the questions she could not yet voice, and in that silence Mark felt a weight he had long avoided, a reckoning that made him fidget, stumble over words, and ultimately retreat into the honesty he had been avoiding. Emily recounted the day's observations, the subtle shifts in behavior, the patterns that could no longer be ignored, and as she spoke, Mark's confidence dissolved, replaced with shame, guilt, and a dawning realization of the damage he had caused. He admitted, softly and haltingly, that he had allowed distance and temptation to creep into his life, that he had not thought of the heartbreak his choices could create. And in those moments, Emily felt both the sting of betrayal and the fragile hope that recognition might lead to change. They spoke late into the night, not in anger, but in a raw, emotional honesty neither had felt in months, with Emily articulating the pain of quiet suspicion, of feeling unseen even in the presence of someone she loved, and Mark listening, absorbing, his heart opening to the consequences of neglect and emotional wandering, understanding for the first time the fragility of trust. and the deep wound that betrayal, emotional or otherwise, can leave on those who love unconditionally. The night stretched on with confessions, tears, and silences heavy with reflection, and Emily realized that pain, though excruciating, could also be transformative if met with clarity and courage. She had not lost herself in anger, had not allowed fear to dictate her response, and in doing so, she offered Mark a mirror he could not ignore, a mirror that reflected both his failures and the potential for redemption. Mark, feeling the weight of truth, made no excuses, and as the hours passed, he began to articulate the reasons behind his distance, his growing reliance on distraction and external connection, acknowledging the ways he had let routines, stress, and comfort pull him away from the intimacy they had shared. Emily listened with a mixture of grief and compassion, recognizing that understanding was not forgiveness, but it was a crucial first step toward healing, a path that required honesty, accountability, and deliberate effort. Over the next days, Emily observed subtle shifts in Mark's demeanor, longer conversations, thoughtful gestures, moments of presence that had been missing, a return of attentiveness that spoke louder than words, and she felt a cautious hope blooming, fragile but real, that perhaps the lesson he had been forced to confront would root deeply, altering not just his behavior but the very way he approached love and commitment. She thought often of the cafe, of the image of him with another woman, and how witnessing that moment had carved into her a pain so acute that it demanded awareness and courage, yet it also ignited a spark of determination to see beyond anger and hurt, to hold space for truth, change, and the possibility of restored intimacy. Emily realized that love, even when wounded, could survive the recognition of mistakes if honesty and effort were present, and she resolved to allow the process to unfold, to witness not just betrayal, but the potential for growth that could emerge from it, knowing that the coming weeks would test patience, resilience, and the strength of both hearts, and that the story of their marriage was still being written, not in the shadows of secrecy, but in the light of truth finally acknowledged. That realization, painful yet clarifying, became a turning point. The moment when Emily understood that heartbreak could be a teacher, that watching someone falter could open the door to transformation, and that the man she loved, if willing to confront his failings, might emerge from this trial not broken, but profoundly changed, carrying the weight of lesson, awareness, and commitment that could sustain their love in ways neither had imagined